My husband James leaned in with that smile again. The kind that almost reached his eyes but stopped just short, like a mask that didn't quite fit. "Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you?" "Honey," he said, setting the cup down in front of me. We were sitting at my sister-in-law Nina's home in Nashville, gathered around her pristine white dining table for our monthly family brunch. The air smelled like maple bacon and fresh croissants. But the aroma from the coffee cup in front of me, my cup, didn't belong in this pleasant scene. It had a metallic, almost chemical tang that made my stomach tighten. I wrapped my fingers around the ceramic, forcing a smile as I glanced across the table. Nina's eyes locked on mine. She was stirring her own coffee, the spoon clinking rhythmically, but the cup remained untouched. Her nails were freshly done, blood red as always. Everything about her screamed intentional, her appearance, her words, even the way she tilted her head to pretend to be interested in whoever was talking. "James has become quite the barista lately," she chimed in with a smirk. "He's been practicing different brewing methods just for you." Just for you. The way she said it sent chills down my spine. James let out a short laugh, rubbing the back of his neck like he always did when he was lying. "It's a new blend," he added, avoiding my eyes. "Thought you'd like it." I tried to ignore the pounding in my chest. "How thoughtful of you," I said, lifting the cup just a little, pretending to inhale the aroma. My smile stayed in place, but inside, my mind was racing. This wasn't the first time something felt wrong. Not the first time I'd found myself in this house with food or drink that made me ill soon after. The urgent care visit last month after I drank Nina's tea, the one she insisted was made, exactly the way I make mine. The breakfast 2 months ago where I ended up doubled over with nausea and no explanation. James always had the same reaction. "Maybe it was something you ate earlier. Maybe it's stress. You know your stomach can be sensitive." Christina. 3 years of marriage and I had started to believe that maybe I was just unlucky. But now, sitting here, with this cup in front of me and both their eyes watching me like hawks, I felt it in my gut. This was no accident. I looked down at the coffee again. The liquid shimmered in the light, darker than usual. The scent was too sharp, unnatural. Nina took a slow sip from her untouched cup, but her lips barely touched the edge. Her eyes never left me. "Excuse me for a moment," I said suddenly, grabbing my phone from the table. "I need to make a quick call for work." James started to say something, but Nina cut in sweetly. "Feel free to use the study, dear." I stood up, and as I moved past Nina, I deliberately let my hand brush the edge of the table. My cup tilted. I stumbled, just enough to create a moment of chaos. "Oh shoot, sorry, I'm such a klutz," I said with a nervous laugh, steadying myself as James reached out reflexively. My hands were fast, practiced from too many dinner parties and awkward brunches. In that second of distraction, I switched our cups. Nina didn't even notice. She waved off my apology with a tight smile. "Just try not to break anything in the study," she said, voice clipped but still syrupy sweet. I nodded, suppressing the tremble in my hands as I walked away. Behind the closed study door, I exhaled. My heart was slamming against my ribs. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, just that I couldn't let myself drink that coffee. Not this time. I'd spent too many nights curled up in pain. Too many days calling out sick, apologizing for missed meetings, wondering if maybe I was the problem. No more. From the crack in the door, I watched. Nina picked up her cup, my cup, and took a small sip. My stomach clenched so hard I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself. What if I was wrong? What if this really was just a new blend, and I'd just poisoned my sister-in-law with overactive paranoia? But then I saw it, James looking at her, then quickly at the cup, then back at her with panic. A flicker of realization crossed his face, followed by a flush of pure fear. And that's when I knew I wasn't crazy. I had never been crazy. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he stood frozen, like a man watching a slow-motion car crash, powerless to stop it. Nina took another sip, frowning now, her brow furrowed. Then she went still. Something was happening. She set the cup down slowly, carefully, but her hands trembled. "James," she whispered, "something's wrong." He jolted into motion, the chair scraping loudly behind him as he stood. What? His voice cracked. What did you put in that coffee? She asked. Her voice barely above a whisper. And that was it. That was the moment everything shifted. The mask slipped. The brunch ended. The lies began to unravel. And I was still standing in the doorway, recording everything. From the doorway of Nina's study, I barely breathed. The air felt heavier now, as if the truth itself was starting to pull oxygen out of the room. Nina's hand hovered over her stomach. Her complexion, always pristine and powdered, had started to lose color. Her lips parted, eyes darting toward James, who looked like he'd just seen a ghost. James, she said again, her voice weaker this time. What did you do? He didn't answer. He couldn't. And I just kept filming. James stumbled forward, knocking over his chair in the process. The thud made everyone at the table go quiet. But Nina's ragged breathing was suddenly the only sound that mattered. She reached for the edge of the table to steady herself. But her fingers slipped. Her mug hit the floor with a sharp crack as she dropped to her knees. I don't feel right. She gasped. James crouched next to her, his voice low but frantic. That wasn't your cup, he hissed. You weren't supposed to drink that. My blood went cold. In the silence of that room, his words felt like a confession wrapped in guilt and panic. My hand gripped the phone tighter. It was still recording. That wasn't your cup. So it was meant for me. I pushed the door open, stepping back into the dining room like someone walking into the final scene of a play they'd been rehearsing for far too long. I've already called 911. I said calmly. They're on their way. Both of them looked up, James pale as paper. Nina now visibly shaking, her knees buckling as she collapsed sideways onto the hardwood floor. Call an ambulance, she gasped, her voice barely audible now. Please, I can't. I did, I replied, still holding my phone steady. Camera aimed at both of them. James looked between me and Nina like a man realizing he'd just lost control of the wheel and the brakes at the same time. Christina, this isn't what you think. Oh no? I cut in. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like you tried to poison me. Again. His mouth opened, then closed. Nina let out a low moan, her body convulsing lightly now. It was happening fast. Whatever had been in that coffee, it wasn't some mild sedative. And just like that, she broke. This is your fault. She spat at James, her voice twisted by both pain and rage. You said it would just make her sick enough to miss the board meeting. You promised it wouldn't be traced. My stomach dropped. So that was the game. The board meeting, my presentation, my client, the Henderson account, the one everyone at both firms had been chasing for months. Nina had been desperate to land that deal. Her team was behind. Her numbers slipping. Meanwhile, mine had been climbing. I had meetings lined up, clients reaching out, praise from upper execs. And instead of working harder or improving, Nina and James had come up with this. Poison me. Discredit me. Take everything I'd built. I stared at them, blinking as her words kept tumbling out. The tea last month, I said slowly. The breakfast incident in June. That wasn't bad luck. That was you too. James was frozen. Nina's eyes widened, but there was no more pretending. That tea was supposed to keep you home during the Johnson contract pitch. She said through clenched teeth. But you showed up anyway. Like always, you just don't stop. The sirens in the distance started to rise. Closer now. Nina slumped again, groaning, clutching her side. James stood up suddenly, his eyes darting toward the front door. You're not going anywhere, I said. He ignored me, took a step back, but froze when I raised my phone again and said, clearly and calmly, this entire thing is on video. From the moment you gave me the coffee. His jaw clenched. He didn't speak. Behind me, the front door burst open, and 2 paramedics rushed in, followed by a police officer. I stepped aside without a word, letting them rush to Nina's side. She's having some kind of toxic reaction, I told them, my voice steady even as adrenaline surged through every inch of my body. It started about 7 minutes ago. I believe it's from something she ingested. Coffee, to be exact. The paramedics nodded and got to work fast, checking vitals, unrolling equipment, moving with the calm urgency that only comes from seeing too much chaos. One of them asked, do you know what she might have taken? I looked straight at James. Ask him. He didn't move. As they worked on Nina, I lowered my phone for the first time and quietly emailed the video to my lawyer. Then to my personal account. Then to a trusted friend. Just in case. The paramedics lifted Nina onto a stretcher as her limbs twitched. Her lips murmuring words none of us could understand anymore. James followed them like a ghost. But when he tried to climb into the ambulance, the police officer held up a hand. She can ride with us. I said, I'll go. James started to protest, but the cop stepped in again. Sir, I'll need you to stay here. We have some questions. I met James's eyes one last time before climbing in next to the stretcher. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because the game had flipped. They'd spent months trying to weaken me, break me, destroy my reputation piece by piece while hiding behind fake smiles and empty apologies. But now I had every piece of the puzzle, and I intended to put it all on the table. This wasn't paranoia. This was evidence. And I was done being their victim. The ambulance raced through the streets of Nashville, sirens splitting the late morning calm. I sat next to Nina, who was strapped down on the stretcher, her arms trembling involuntarily, her skin ghost pale and clammy. She wasn't saying much anymore, just the occasional groan. A wince. A half-muttered apology to no one in particular. I didn't say a word to her. Not yet. When we arrived at Nashville General, a team of nurses took over, wheeling her through the double doors while barking vitals and symptom updates. One of them asked me, Your family? Sister-in-law, I said, calm and clear. They let me follow. I stayed close but out of the way. Just enough to observe every moment, how they reacted to the symptoms. How quickly they began administering antitoxins. How grave their faces became when nothing improved immediately. One of the doctors called for a full tox screen. Another requested her stomach be pumped. It was happening. They were going to find it. And then the story I had been living, alone, confused, quietly terrified for months, would finally be real in the eyes of the law. I sat in the waiting room, phone in hand, replaying the video I'd sent to my lawyer. James's face, his whisper, that wasn't your cup. Nina's words, you said it would just make her miss the board meeting. They were all there, raw and clear, not circumstantial, not paranoia, truth, caught on camera. Family of Nina Anderson? A nurse called out. Clipboard in hand. I stood. That's me. She's stable now, the nurse said, her expression grave, but we found some alarming compounds in her system. The doctor would like to speak with you privately. I nodded and followed her through a side hallway. Adrenaline still pumping like it hadn't stopped since brunch. At the door to room 412, a tall woman in her early 50s stood waiting. Drive. Phillips. The badge read. Her eyes were sharp, experienced, the kind of woman who'd seen too much and wasn't easily rattled. Mrs. Bennett, she said, motioning for me to step into the consultation alcove. Can you tell me exactly what happened before your sister-in-law became ill? Instead of answering immediately, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I think it'll be easier if you hear this first. She watched the video silently, her face unreadable, but her eyes narrowed the moment James's voice whispered that wasn't supposed to be your cup. And they stayed that way through Nina's shaky confession. By the time it ended, she was already scribbling notes. This is very serious, she said. I know. We've already started a toxicology screen. She continued, but based on what you've shown me, I'll also have the lab run a targeted test for pharmaceutical-grade agents. The symptoms match. Pharmaceutical? I asked, though in truth, I already suspected. She gave me a nod. We've seen similar reactions in clinical settings, drugs used for testing purposes. Never meant for general public use. It's not something you find over the counter. My mouth went dry. Can you tell if this matches what I've had in the past? She paused, then nodded slowly. We'll need to access your previous records. But if you've been admitted to this hospital before. I have, I said, 3 times. February, April, and June, all after eating or drinking something from Nina's house. She blinked. Just once. You believe you were intentionally poisoned. I know I was, I said, pulling out another phone, a backup I'd been keeping hidden from James for months. I've been recording, not everything, not every time, but enough. Text messages, phone calls, even receipts from pharmacies I'm pretty sure he shouldn't have had access to. Just then, James appeared at the far end of the hallway. His face was pale, glistening with sweat. He looked like a man who had run out of options. "Christina," he called, stepping toward me, voice cracking. "Please, let me explain." Dr. Phillips stepped between us and hit the nurse's call button. "Security to room 412. Please. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," James said, his hands raised in surrender. Nina was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. "Really?" I said, calmly scrolling through my gallery. "Because I have the texts between you two. The ones about making sure I was out of commission before the Henderson pitch. The ones where she said I was ruining everything she worked for." His face went completely still. "You went through my phone? After I found the bottle with no label in your desk drawer?" "Yes, I did." Dr. Phillips raised an eyebrow. "We'll need to run comparative tests. See if what we found in Nina matches what Mrs. Bennett had in her system during previous hospitalizations." James looked like he wanted to say something, anything, but the words weren't coming. Not anymore. He glanced behind him just in time to see two uniformed security guards turning the corner. Walking straight toward him. "You don't understand," he said quickly, voice cracking. "We were just trying to protect you." "By drugging me?" I asked, staring him down. "You really want to play that card?" Security flanked him on either side. "Sir, we need you to stay here until investigators arrive." "I'm not a criminal," James muttered. "Then why do you look like one?" I said quietly. He turned his head sharply. And for the first time in all of this, he didn't look confused or scared. He looked angry. "Christina, you were burning yourself out," he snapped. "Taking every client, every project. You wouldn't slow down." Nina said. "I don't care what Nina said." I snapped back. "You made a decision. Both of you did. And now, I'm making mine." Just behind him, through the small glass window of Nina's room, I could see her watching us, hooked up to monitors. Face twisted in pain and fear. Dr. Phillips turned to me again. "The police will want a formal statement." "I'm ready," I said. "And I've been ready for a long time. Because this wasn't about saving face anymore. This was about survival. And I wasn't about to let them rewrite the story now that the evidence was screaming louder than their lies ever could." Detective Mendoza arrived less than an hour later. You could feel the energy shift the second she stepped onto the floor, controlled. No nonsense. And not there to waste a minute. Mid-40s, hair pulled into a tight bun. Her blazer crisp despite the chaos swirling around her. She carried herself like someone who had seen every trick in the book, and written a few herself. "I'm here for the incident involving Nina Anderson," she said, flashing her badge to the nurse at the station. The nurse pointed down the hall toward Nina's room. Then toward me. "Mrs. Bennett?" the detective asked. Walking over with a firm, steady gaze. I stood. "That's me." We stepped into a consultation room. It was quiet in there. Just a low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Mendoza sat across from me and opened a small notebook while placing her recorder on the table. "I understand you have evidence related to today's incident." I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. "It started with this," I said. "This morning, at brunch." She hit play. She didn't interrupt. Not once. She listened to every word, James's whisper. Nina's panicked confession. My calm voice explaining what I just witnessed. When it ended, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. "That's a hell of a video," she said finally. "There's more." I opened the Notes app where I'd been documenting everything for months. I showed her the list, dates, times, symptoms, visits, medications. The day I noticed the weird taste in my tea. The night I ended up vomiting blood after breakfast at Nina's. Every moment I doubted myself. Written off the signs. Convinced myself I was being dramatic, now laid out in perfect detail. "And this phone," I added, pulling out the backup from my purse. I kept it hidden. Used a second number. Recorded conversations. There's a folder marked, proof, several audio clips. They weren't always explicit, but you can hear the intent. She scrolled through quickly, her eyes narrowing as Nina's voice played through one of the recordings. "The Henderson account is worth millions. James, we can't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Just stick to the plan. A few days of illness should be enough." And then James, quieter, but clear. "I've got something stronger this time. She won't make it to the presentation." The detective didn't say anything for a second. Then she nodded and reached for her radio. I need 2 officers posted outside room 412 and Mr. Bennett detained until further notice. We have probable cause for search and seizure. Everything shifted in that moment. No more whispers, no more sick days with no explanation, no more doubting my own reality. From the window in the consultation room, I could see James pacing outside, flanked by 2 security guards who now looked much more alert. Inside Nina's hospital room, she was awake. She looked deflated, not angry, not defensive, just tired. Maybe she knew it was over. Or maybe she was trying to figure out her next move. But the truth was no longer hers to spin. Dr. Phillips entered Nina's room again, tablet in hand, her expression unreadable. Detective Mendoza and I followed. We've completed the initial tox screen, the doctor said. There are multiple compounds in her system, one in particular that's used in pharmaceutical research. It's not something that's available for home use. And it absolutely shouldn't be ingested. Nina tried to sit up straighter in bed. But the effort clearly took everything she had. Her hands trembled at her sides. That's impossible, she croaked. James said, he said it was just something to make her sick. Mendoza's voice was cold, like the other times she ended up in the hospital? Nina's jaw clenched, but she didn't answer. The door opened again, and another officer entered holding a sealed evidence bag. We found these in Mr. Bennett's office desk, he said, handing it to the detective. Inside, several vials with white labels, a list of chemical codes, and a small spiral notebook, pages filled with handwriting, dosages, dates, symptoms, a testing log. My knees went weak, but I didn't let myself fall. I looked at Nina. You were documenting me, like an experiment. She didn't respond. Mendoza flipped through the notebook. It's all here, she muttered. You tracked every reaction, every failed attempt, and escalated the dosage every time she didn't go down. You knew exactly what you were doing. James, still visible through the small glass window, had stopped pacing. He was sitting now, head in hands, maybe finally realizing the weight of it all. Dr. Phillips looked up. The concentration in the coffee this morning was significantly higher than anything Christina's had in her system before. If she'd actually drank it, there's a very real chance it would have killed her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Nina, her voice thin, hollow, whispered, "It wasn't supposed to go that far." "But it did," I said quietly. "You kept pushing. You kept watching me suffer. And you just took notes." Detective Mendoza turned toward her. "We're getting a warrant for both of your homes. Both of your offices. And we'll be contacting the pharmaceutical company listed on those labels. You need to prepare yourself. Ms. Anderson, this is no longer about professional rivalry. This is attempted murder." Nina stared down at the blanket pulled over her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just went still. The kind of still you only see when someone knows the game is over. The trial began 3 months later. But I swear to God, it felt like it had taken years just to get there. Every time I walked into that courtroom, it was like stepping back into the dining room that morning, same twisting in my gut. Same smell of polished wood and quiet tension. Nina sat with her lawyer, expression stiff, but not surprised. She'd accepted her role in all this. James, on the other hand, looked like he still thought this was some kind of misunderstanding that might magically go away if he just looked sorry enough. The courtroom was cold, too cold, and the lights too bright. But I showed up every single day. Not because I had to. Because I needed to. I needed to look both of them in the eye and remind them I was still here. The prosecution came armed. They laid it all out, my hospital visits, the toxicology reports, the recordings, the video from brunch, the vials recovered from James's office, and most damning of all, the notebook. That notebook was like a blueprint of their intentions. It had dates, dosages, symptoms, reactions, and even notations like, "not strong enough," or "try new batch before Henderson." When Dr. Phillips took the stand, her voice didn't waver once. She walked the jury through every entry on my medical chart, linked every spike in symptoms to the substance now confirmed in Nina's bloodstream. Then she dropped the real hammer. The dosage found in my coffee the day of the brunch, if I'd consumed it, could have caused cardiac arrest. Not nausea, not weakness, death. The courtroom went silent. No one even shifted in their seat. James wouldn't look up. Then came the pharmaceutical company rep. Young guy, nervous, but clear. He confirmed the compounds came from their lab. Said James's college roommate worked in research and had borrowed small test samples over the course of a year. They had it on internal email. They had security footage. They had receipts. And suddenly, we weren't talking about some jealous sister-in-law and a bumbling husband. We were talking about corporate-grade sabotage laced with scientific precision. Nina's lawyer tried to pivot, said she never meant harm. Just wanted to slow me down. Wanted me to take a few days off. Paint her as overwhelmed, manipulated by James, pressured by work stress. But the texts told a different story. So did the audio recordings. The jury listened to one where Nina hissed through the phone. Christina's making us look incompetent. She doesn't sleep. She doesn't break. She's going to take everything. And James replied, then maybe it's time she broke. I sat there, listening to their voices like echoes from a different life. A life where I thought love meant trust and family meant loyalty. But there they were, plotting my downfall like I was some competitor they had to eliminate. The prosecution didn't need to do much after that. Their closing argument was devastating in its simplicity. This wasn't carelessness. It wasn't miscommunication. It was planned. It escalated. And if not for one single switch of two identical coffee cups, Mrs. Christina Bennett would not be sitting in this courtroom today. I'll never forget the silence after the verdict was read. Not because it was unexpected, but because of how final it felt. Both James and Nina were found guilty. Attempted murder, conspiracy, unlawful possession of restricted pharmaceutical substances. Sentencing came quickly. The judge looked them both in the eye and said, the calculated nature of your actions, targeting a family member, repeated over time with escalating harm, leaves no room for leniency. Then he gave them the maximum. When they were led away in handcuffs, I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed, like I was finally exhaling after holding my breath for 3 whole years. I left the courthouse without looking back. Because there was nothing left for me in that chapter. It was over. And I had a new one to begin. 1 year later, I stood behind the podium at the Nashville Business Leaders Conference, staring out into a sea of eyes that waited, not just for words, but for something real. The irony didn't escape me. This was the very stage Nina had once told me I'd never make it to. Too ambitious, she'd said, too aggressive, too young to lead. But here I was. The spotlight wasn't hers anymore. And honestly, I didn't want revenge to be the theme of my speech. I wanted truth. I wanted someone out there, some woman sitting in the crowd, doubting her instincts, questioning her worth, to hear what I was about to say and realize she wasn't crazy. Success, I told them, isn't just about talent. It's not about grinding harder than the next person or staying later at the office. It's about integrity. It's about the people you choose to trust and how you choose to stand when everything in your life tries to push you down. I paused, letting it settle. Then I looked across the crowd and added, sometimes the greatest threats to our success don't come from outside. They come from the people sitting at our own table. Sometimes they call you, honey, and hand you a cup of coffee. The room went quiet, but not in that awkward way. No one checked their phones. No one whispered. They just listened. And for once, I didn't flinch when I talked about it. After the verdict, things moved fast. My team rallied. The Henderson account, the one James and Nina had nearly killed to sabotage, was not only secured, it turned into a multi-year partnership. That deal alone led to 3 others. And before long, I had a waiting list of clients asking when I'd have room for them. The firm offered me a leadership role, and I accepted it on my terms. No apologies, no discounts. I built a new inner circle, quiet, smart, fiercely loyal. No more fake smiles, no more poisoned brunches dressed as networking. That morning, before the conference, I'd opened an email from Henderson and Partners confirming they were renewing for another 3 years. And just like that, a chapter closed. I didn't even forward it to my lawyer. I just smiled. There'd been a small article in the local paper that day too, buried deep in the metro section. James Bennett and Nina Anderson had officially begun their sentences at 2 separate state correctional facilities. There was no photo, no fanfare, just a few sentences about two white-collar professionals convicted of conspiracy and attempted murder. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. I wasn't keeping score anymore. What mattered was that I was still standing. That my voice was louder than their silence. That I hadn't disappeared like they'd hoped. I was still showing up. Still growing. Still turning everything they tried to ruin into the very reason I thrived. After the speech, people lined up to shake my hand. Some asked about leadership. Others wanted mentorship. But one woman, maybe in her 30s, walked up with tears in her eyes. She didn't ask for advice. She just said, I knew something felt off. But no one believed me. I reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. Then believe yourself. That's where it begins. That night, I walked back to my car alone. The city was glowing, warm streetlights. Distant hum of traffic. The quiet kind of evening that feels earned. I thought about the Christina who sat at that brunch table 1 year ago. Staring into a cup of coffee that could have ended her life. She didn't drink it. She trusted her gut. And in doing so, she didn't just survive. She took back everything they tried to steal from her, her voice. Her career, her peace. They wanted to break me. But they forgot one thing. You can't poison a woman who already knows how to turn bitterness into power. You can only teach her how to serve it back. Ice cold, with a smile.